My future mother-in-law didn't ask me to sign a prenup. She asked me to sign something that would give her control over everything I owned. And the worst part? For a second, I almost signed it. Because it didn't look like a trap. It looked like love, like family, like something you say yes to if you don't want to ruin everything. But one line, just one, made me realize this wasn't about building a life together. It was about taking mine, quietly. And what I found 3 days later? That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. The air in Houston felt thick and still that afternoon, sunlight stretching across polished marble like nothing in the room had ever been out of place. For a second, I almost signed a document that would have given my future mother-in-law control over everything I owned. My money, my home, my future. And she almost got away with it. My name is Nia Brooks. I'm 31, black, self-made, and very careful about what I build, and who I build it with. My skin is deep brown with a natural glow that catches light without needing anything extra, and I wear my hair in long, clean braids, always neat, always intentional. People often say I seem calm, but that calm didn't come from an easy life. It came from learning, early on, that nobody was coming to save me. By the time I met Malik Carter, I had already built something of my own. A growing event design business, a one-bedroom condo in my name, and savings that didn't come from luck, but from discipline. I wasn't rich, but everything I had, I understood. Every dollar had a story, every decision had a cost. Malik was different from most men I had met. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that didn't need attention to be felt. His skin was smooth and even, his beard trimmed just enough to sharpen his jawline without making him look too polished. But what made him stand out wasn't how he looked, it was how he listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't perform, just paid attention. And that's how he got me. Slowly, then all at once. We built something steady over 2 years. No chaos, no games. Just two people who respected each other's independence. Or at least, that's what I thought. Because there was one part of his life that never fully opened up. His family. And then there was his mother, Denise Carter. Denise wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. She was the kind of woman who controlled a room without raising her voice. Tall, slim, perfectly composed, her skin smooth and carefully maintained, her hair pressed into a sleek, shoulder-length style that never moved out of place. She wore neutral tones, cream, beige, soft gold, like she understood that real power didn't need bright colors. Everything about her was measured, intentional, controlled. The first time she met me, she smiled, not warmly, not coldly, just precisely. Like she had already decided something about me and was waiting to see if I would confirm it. I told myself I was imagining things. I wasn't. 2 weeks before our engagement party, she invited me over. Malik couldn't make it, something about a last-minute deal closing. I remember feeling a small flicker of discomfort, but I ignored it. I didn't want to be the woman who made things complicated. That was my first mistake. Her house was exactly what you'd expect. Perfectly staged, almost too clean, like nothing personal was allowed to disrupt the design. We sat at her kitchen island, marble cold under my hands. She poured tea, calm and unhurried, then slid a folder across the surface toward me. "I believe in clarity before commitment," she said. The folder was thicker than I expected. Inside was a document titled Family Financial Agreement. Not a prenup. Something else. For a second, I almost signed it. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to seem difficult, because I wanted to belong. And I hate admitting this, but a part of me wanted to say yes, just to keep the peace. That's when I realized something dangerous. The trap wasn't the contract. The trap was making me feel like saying no would cost me everything. I started reading, slowly, carefully. At first, it sounded harmless. Words like unity, shared growth, financial alignment. The kind of language that makes you feel like you're building something together. But then, I saw it. All individual assets contributed shall be consolidated under unified management. Unified management? I looked up. What does that mean? Denise smiled slightly. It means you and Malik will operate as one financial unit. It simplifies things. Simplifies. That word sat wrong in my chest. I kept reading. Primary financial authority shall be designated for consistency in decision-making. Designated. Not shared. Not equal. Designated. I didn't need to ask who that would be. And in that moment, everything slowed down, because I finally understood what I was looking at. This wasn't about building a marriage. This was about building a system. One where my assets became shared, but control stayed somewhere else. If I signed that document, my business? Vulnerable. My condo? Absorbable. My savings? No longer mine to decide. And if anything ever went wrong, I wouldn't just lose control. I might not even be able to prove I ever had it. My chest tightened, not from panic, but from clarity. Because I had seen something like this before. Not in contracts, but in people. Systems that look safe until you're already inside them. I closed the folder slowly, my fingers steady even though something inside me wasn't. Denise watched me the entire time, her expression calm, patient, like she already knew how this would go. In this family, she said quietly, we don't leave money unstructured. There it was. Not a suggestion, a rule. And suddenly everything made sense. I wasn't being invited into a family. I was being asked to step into something that had already been designed. A structure, a system. A life where my role had already been decided before I ever agreed to it. I stood up, the folder still in my hands. My heartbeat wasn't fast. It was heavy, grounded, certain. Because for the first time in 2 years, something didn't feel right. And I've learned to trust that feeling. I walked out of that house with the contract still in my hands, and a question I couldn't ignore anymore. If everything between me and Malik was real, then why did it suddenly feel like I was being written into something I didn't choose? And what I discovered 3 days later? That's when I realized this wasn't just a conversation. It was a plan. I thought the contract was the trap. I was wrong. The real trap? It had already been set, weeks before I ever saw that paper, and I was about to walk straight into it. I'm Nia Brooks. I built everything myself. My condo, my business, my savings. And somehow, in one quiet afternoon, someone almost convinced me to give it all away. The moment I left Denise Carter's house, something inside me refused to settle. Not panic, not confusion, just a quiet certainty that something didn't add up. And I've learned to trust that feeling, because every time I ignored it in the past, it cost me more than I was willing to lose again. I sat in my car, the contract still in my hands, staring at the clean, perfect pages. Everything looked professional, thoughtful, reasonable. And that's what made it dangerous, because nothing about it looked like control, until you slowed down enough to see it. That's when I realized something else. People don't push structures like this unless something is already in motion. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to react. I was going to understand. That night, I called Tasha Reynolds. Tasha had been my friend long before either of us had anything to protect. Tall, athletic, dark-skinned with sharp features and short natural curls she never softened. She carried herself like someone who had learned to question everything. She worked as a legal assistant in a real estate litigation firm, and if there was one thing about Tasha, it was that she didn't trust clean paperwork. Not after watching her own mother lose a house over a contract she didn't fully understand. That experience made her direct, skeptical, and impossible to manipulate. "You didn't sign it, right?" she asked immediately. "No." "Good," she said, "because this isn't about marriage." I leaned back slowly. "Then what is it?" She didn't hesitate. "It's about control. And the scary part? It's written like you're supposed to thank them for it." That hit harder than I expected. Because she was right. It didn't feel like pressure. It felt like expectation. And expectation is harder to fight. "That's when something didn't sit right," I said quietly. "Why now?" Tasha went silent for a second. "Because something's already happening," she replied. "Nobody sets up a system like that unless they already know where the money's going." That's when everything shifted. Not emotionally, strategically. The next morning, I met Malik. He was already sitting at the table when I arrived, broad shoulders slightly tense, his jaw tighter than usual. Malik wasn't a man who hid things well, not because he was dishonest, but because he wasn't used to needing to be. He lived in a world where things were already handled. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I placed the contract between us. "Did you know about this?" He looked at it, then at me. "I knew she wanted structure. I didn't know it was like this." That's when I noticed it. He wasn't defending it, but he wasn't surprised either. That space in between, that's where things get dangerous. "Read page 6, I said. He did, slowly this time. I watched his expression change, not dramatically, but enough. His brows pulled in slightly, his eyes paused longer on certain lines. "That's not how I thought it worked," he said. "Then how did you think it worked?" "That we'd be building together." I nodded. That's what I thought too. Silence stretched between us. He closed the folder, exhaling slowly. "We can fix this. We'll talk to her." We. The word should have felt safe. It didn't. Because something still wasn't finished. And 2 days later, I found out why. It started with a client call. Victor Hale, mid-40s, sharp features, controlled voice, the kind of man who spoke like every word had already been negotiated before he said it. He was a developer, confident, calculated, and always one step ahead of the room. We were discussing an event setup when he mentioned something casually that made my entire body go still. "The Carter property on Lake Ridge," he said. "That's going to be a big one." That's when everything slowed down. "Which Carter?" I asked. "Malik Carter's family," he replied. "They closed on it recently. Smart move locking it in early." Closed on it recently. That's when the timeline snapped into place. I ended the call calmly, professionally, but the second it ended, I stopped breathing. Because now I knew where to look. Property records don't lie. It took me less than 20 minutes, and there it was. The house. Purchased 3 weeks ago. Owner, Carter Family Trust. Beneficiary, Malik Carter. Not me. Never me. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint against the glass. And that's when it hit me. Not slowly, all at once. She didn't write the contract to protect the house. She bought the house, and then wrote the contract around it. If I had signed, my money would have gone into shared assets. Those assets could have been used to maintain, upgrade, invest into that property. A property I would live in. A property I would help build. A property I would never legally own. I wasn't just being excluded. I was being used. That realization didn't hurt the way I expected. It didn't break me. It clarified everything. Because now I wasn't guessing anymore. I was seeing the system exactly as it was designed. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I closed my laptop slowly, my heartbeat steady. Because now the question wasn't what Denise was doing. That part was clear. The real question was something else entirely. I picked up my phone, staring at Malik's name. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think something I hadn't been ready to face before. What if Malik wasn't just caught in this? What if he had known, longer than he was telling me? And what I found out next? That's when I stopped trying to understand the system and started preparing to break it. At first, it sounded harmless. Combine finances, build together. But one line changed everything. Managed by primary account holder. Not us. Him. That line didn't just sit on the page. It stayed with me, followed me, echoed in every quiet moment like something I had already heard before but never paid attention to. Because the truth is, control rarely shows up loud. It shows up reasonable. It shows up structured. It shows up sounding like something you're supposed to agree with. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I didn't call Malik that night. I needed to watch first, to listen, to see what was real without confronting it too early. Because once you ask the wrong question, you don't get the truth. You get the version people are ready to give you. And I wasn't interested in prepared answers. I wanted the truth before it was shaped. The next evening, Malik invited me to dinner at his place. His apartment was modern, clean, minimal. Dark wood floors, neutral furniture, everything functional but not deeply personal. The kind of place that felt lived in, but not rooted. There were no photos on the walls, no history, just space. That should have told me something earlier. Malik stood in the kitchen when I walked in, sleeves rolled up, his posture relaxed but his movements slightly more controlled than usual. He was trying to keep things normal. That's how I knew something wasn't. He greeted me with a quick kiss, his hand lingering just a second longer than usual on my waist, like he was checking if I was still there. We sat down to eat, and for a while, we talked about nothing. Work, clients, schedules, safe things. But underneath it, I could feel it, something unspoken sitting between us. That's when I decided to test something. "Tell me about the Lake Ridge property," I said casually, watching his reaction carefully. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have caught it, but I did. His fork paused midair for half a second too long. His eyes flickered, not away, but inward, like he was processing faster than he expected to. "That's just something my mom's handling," he said. Just something. That's when something didn't sit right. "Handling how?" I asked, still calm. He set his fork down this time, slower, more deliberate. "It's an investment. She does this all the time." All the time. That phrase felt practiced, repeated. "And you're the beneficiary?" I asked. This time he didn't answer immediately. He leaned back slightly, his jaw tightening just enough for me to notice. Malik wasn't a man who lied easily. But he was a man who had learned how to avoid saying too much. "It's in a trust," he said finally. "That's how my family structures things." That's when everything sharpened, because now it wasn't just about the contract, it was about a pattern, a system that already existed long before I ever stepped into it, and I was being asked to adapt to it without fully understanding what it meant for me. "Did you know about it before your mom gave me that agreement?" I asked quietly. He looked at me then, fully, no distraction, no avoidance. And that's when I saw it. Not guilt, not exactly, but something close to hesitation. "I knew she was planning something," he said. "I didn't know the timing." The timing. That word landed harder than anything else he had said, because timing was everything. She didn't just create the system, she timed it, and Malik knew enough to not be surprised. That realization didn't explode, it settled. Deep, slow, certain. I nodded slightly, like I understood, because in that moment, I needed him to believe I still did. But inside, something had already shifted, because I wasn't asking the same questions anymore. Before, I wanted to know if he was with me. Now, I needed to know how long he had been inside it. That night, I didn't push further. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. Because confrontation gives people time to defend themselves. And I wasn't ready for defenses. I was still collecting facts. Instead, I went home, and I made another call. This time, to someone Tasha had mentioned earlier, Marcus Ellison. Marcus was a real estate attorney in his early 40s, tall, lean, with sharp cheekbones and a closely trimmed beard that gave his face a precise, analytical look. His skin was a deep, cool brown, his voice calm but direct, the kind of man who didn't waste words because he didn't need to. He had built his career dealing with property disputes, trust structures, and cases where ownership wasn't as simple as it looked. People went to him when things were already complicated. "I need you to look at something," I told him. The next morning, I sat across from him in his office, sunlight cutting through the blinds in clean lines across his desk. I handed him the contract. He read it in silence, flipping pages without expression. Then he stopped, right at that line. "Managed by primary account holder." He leaned back slightly, tapping the page once with his finger. "This isn't about sharing assets," he said. "I know." He looked up at me then, his eyes sharper now. "This is about control of decision-making. And once assets are commingled under a structure like this," he paused, "you don't just lose access, you lose leverage." Leverage. That word hit differently, because that's what this was really about. Not money, power. "If that trust owns the property," he continued, "and your assets flow into anything connected to it." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I already understood. That's when the final piece clicked into place. I wasn't being asked to join a system. I was being positioned inside it, exactly where I would have the least control. I walked out of that office with something I didn't have before. Not fear, not confusion, clarity. Because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and more importantly, I knew what I needed to do next. But the real question wasn't about Denise anymore. It wasn't even about the contract. It was about Malik. Because if he knew even part of this, then everything between us wasn't just complicated. It was built on something I hadn't agreed to. And what I uncovered that night, going through something he never thought I would see, that's when I stopped questioning his role in this and started seeing it for what it really was. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a marriage plan. It was a control system. If I signed, my money becomes ours, but control stays his. The realization didn't come like a shock that breaks you. It came like something locking into place, clean and precise, the way truth often does when you finally stop resisting it. I sat in my living room that night, the city lights reflecting faintly against the windows, my laptop open but untouched. Everything around me was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Because now I wasn't trying to figure out what Denise was doing. I already knew. I was trying to understand how far it went and how long Malik had been standing inside it. I didn't confront him, not yet, because I needed one more piece. Not suspicion, not instinct. Proof. Something that didn't rely on interpretation. Something that couldn't be softened or explained away. That's when I remembered something Malik had said months ago, casually, like it didn't matter. My mom keeps everything organized. All the documents, trusts, investments. It's easier that way. At the time, it sounded efficient, responsible. Now it sounded like something else entirely. The next day, I went back to his place. Not as a guest this time, as someone paying attention. Malik wasn't home. He had told me he'd be tied up in meetings all afternoon. That gave me a window. Not to snoop blindly, but to look for what I already knew existed. Systems don't operate without records, and Denise didn't seem like the kind of woman who trusted memory over documentation. Malik's apartment was just as I remembered, clean, minimal, controlled. But now I noticed something I hadn't before. A locked drawer in his office desk. Subtle, almost hidden. The kind of thing you don't question until you have a reason to. That's when something inside me hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of realization. Because once you open something like that, you don't go back to not knowing. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting lightly against the edge of the desk, my heartbeat steady but heavier than usual. This wasn't about catching him in a lie. It was about understanding the truth before it was given to me in pieces. I didn't force it open. I didn't need to. Because Malik had never expected me to look. The key wasn't hidden well. It was in a small ceramic tray beside his watch, mixed in with loose change and cufflinks, careless almost. Or maybe just confident. That's when it hit me again. He didn't think I would question any of this. I opened the drawer slowly. Inside, everything was exactly what I expected. Neat, organized, structured. Files labeled clearly, arranged in a way that made sense only if you already understood the system. And then I saw it. A folder labeled Carter Family Trust, Internal Documents. My fingers paused for a second before I picked it up, not out of doubt, out of confirmation. Because I already knew what I was about to find. I opened it. The first few pages were exactly what you'd expect. Legal language, ownership structures, beneficiary details. But then I saw something that made everything stop. A document dated 6 months ago, long before Denise ever handed me that agreement. I read it once, then again, slower, carefully. And this time, I didn't need anyone to explain it to me. Because it was all there, clear, intentional, planned. A financial projection model, mapping out asset integration post-marriage, projected contributions, expected value increase tied to external capital. External capital. That was me. My money. My business. My assets. They weren't guessing. They had calculated it. They had planned for it. And Malik's name was on it, not just as beneficiary, as participant. That's when everything inside me went still. Not angry, not broken, just clear. Because now there was no more space for doubt. This wasn't something he had just found himself in. This wasn't something happening around him. He was already part of it. Maybe not at the level Denise was. Maybe not with the same intention. But he knew enough to stand inside it without questioning it. And that was enough. I closed the folder slowly, placing it back exactly where I found it. My hands weren't shaking. My breath wasn't uneven. Because the moment of emotional reaction had already passed. What was left now was something else. Understanding. And understanding changes everything. Because now I wasn't deciding whether to sign anything. I was deciding how to respond. I stepped away from the desk, looking around the room one last time. The same space that once felt neutral now felt different. Not hostile, not threatening, just constructed. Like everything in it had a purpose, including me. I walked out of the apartment quietly, closing the door behind me without a sound. The hallway felt colder than before, or maybe that was just me noticing more. I pulled out my phone, staring at Malik's name again. But this time, the question wasn't whether I should call him. It was what I would say when I did. Because now I knew something he didn't think I knew. And knowledge like that doesn't just change a conversation. It changes the balance. But what I didn't expect, what I wasn't prepared for, was what Malik would say before I even had the chance to confront him. I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. I didn't walk away. I did something far more dangerous. I rewrote the rules. So I didn't say no. I rewrote it. One clause. If anyone used my assets without permission, they'd have to pay me double. Suddenly, the system had consequences. The moment I closed Malik's apartment door behind me, I knew exactly what I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to react emotionally. Not yet. Because emotion is predictable, and predictable people are easy to manage. And if there was one thing I understood now, it was that Denise didn't build systems around unpredictability. She built them around control. So I gave her something she wasn't expecting. Silence. Not passive silence, strategic silence. For 2 days, I didn't call Malik. I didn't text. I didn't bring anything up. I let the space sit exactly where it was, untouched, unchallenged. Because people reveal more when they think everything is still under control. And in that silence, I prepared. I called Marcus Ellison again, this time not to understand the system, but to change it. Marcus sat across from me in his office, sleeves rolled neatly at his forearms, his posture straight, his eyes focused in that sharp, deliberate way that made you feel like nothing you said would be missed. He had the kind of face that held no wasted movement, every expression controlled, every reaction measured. Years of dealing with disputes had shaped him into someone who didn't just read contracts, he read intentions. "You're not trying to walk away," he said after I explained everything. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm trying to stay without losing control." That made him pause, not because he didn't understand, but because he did. "That's harder," he said. "I know." He leaned back slightly, tapping a pen against the desk. "Then you don't reject the system, you force it to account for you." That's when it clicked, not emotionally, strategically. Because if Denise built a system that protected her side, then I needed to build something that made using it expensive. We spent the next 2 hours drafting a clause. Not long, not complicated, but precise. Every word mattered. Every phrase carried weight. And when it was done, it didn't look aggressive. It looked reasonable. That's what made it powerful. I read it again before leaving his office, letting the words settle in my mind the same way Denise's contract had the first time I saw it. Ownership attribution, explicit consent, breach of fiduciary duty, mandatory restitution at 200% market value. Clean, unavoidable, fair on the surface, but underneath, it changed everything. Because now, if they used my assets without my permission, they wouldn't just benefit, they would pay. And systems built on control don't function well when control becomes risky. That night, Malik called. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. Nia, his voice came through, lower than usual, more careful. We need to talk. There it was, not defensive, not aggressive, controlled, just like everything else. I agree, I said simply. We met the next evening, not at his place, not at mine. Neutral ground. A quiet restaurant with low lighting and enough distance between tables to keep conversations private. Malik was already there when I arrived, his posture straight, his hands resting flat against the table like he was preparing himself. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't soft either. It was something in between, focused, like he had already decided how he wanted this conversation to go. I know you've been looking into things, he said before I even sat down. That caught my attention, not because he knew, but because he said it first. I've been trying to understand, I replied calmly, taking my seat. He nodded once. You could have just asked me. That almost made me smile, because now I knew better. I did, I said quietly. You just didn't give me everything. That landed. Not loudly, but enough. A brief silence settled between us before he leaned back slightly, exhaling. This isn't what you think it is. That's when something inside me shifted again, because I had heard that line before, from people who believed their version of the truth was enough. I'm not guessing anymore, Malik, I said, my voice steady. I know about the trust, the house, the projections. That did it. Not a full reaction, but enough. His jaw tightened. His eyes held mine a second longer than usual, and in that moment, he understood something too. I wasn't walking into this blind anymore. So what now? He asked. There it was, the real question. Not denial, not explanation, positioning. That's when I reached into my bag and placed a single page on the table between us. My clause. He looked down at it, then back at me. What is this? My terms, I said simply. He picked it up, reading slowly, carefully, the same way I had read his mother's contract. His expression didn't change much, but I could see it. The pause, the recalculation, the moment something no longer felt simple. That's a lot, he said finally. No, I replied calmly. It's equal. Silence. He looked at the paper again, then at me. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't the one being positioned. The system was. And now, it had something it didn't have before. Consequences. But what I didn't expect, what I hadn't prepared for, was the way his expression changed after reading the last line. Not confusion, not resistance, something else. Something closer to recognition. And that's when I realized this wasn't the first time he had seen a move like this. Then I found out the truth. She had already bought the house. Before the wedding, before telling us. And if I had signed, I would have paid for a home I could never own. But that wasn't even the part that broke everything. The truth wasn't the house. The truth was how long it had been planned, and who had known. I sat across from Malik in that dimly lit restaurant, the single page of my clause still resting between us, but it no longer felt like the center of the conversation. His reaction, subtle, controlled, but unmistakable, had shifted something deeper. Not fear, not anger, recognition. Like he wasn't surprised by what I had done, just surprised that I had done it. That's when I realized something else. He had seen this kind of move before. Not from me, from someone else. "Where have you seen something like this?" I asked quietly, my voice calm but direct. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes dropped back to the page, scanning the last paragraph again, slower this time. His fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the paper, just enough to crease it. Malik wasn't a man who reacted quickly. He processed, calculated. That was part of what made him stable, and now, part of what made him dangerous. "Not exactly like this," he said finally. Not exactly. That wasn't denial. That was deflection. "That's not what I asked," I replied. Silence stretched between us, heavier than before. Then he leaned back slightly, exhaling, his jaw tightening as if he had already decided something he didn't want to say. "My father," he said. That name landed differently, because Malik didn't talk about his father, ever. I sat still, letting him continue without interrupting. "He didn't structure things like my mom does," Malik went on, his voice lower now, less controlled. He questioned it, pushed back on how everything was set up. I watched him closely, the way his shoulders shifted slightly, the way his eyes didn't quite meet mine when he spoke. That wasn't just memory. That was something unfinished. "What happened?" I asked. This time the pause was longer. Then, "He lost everything." The words were simple, flat, but they carried weight. "Because of her?" Malik's eyes flickered up to mine for a second. Not long, just enough. "Because he didn't understand the system he was in," he said carefully. That answer was too clean, too controlled, and that's when it hit me again, not as a realization, as confirmation. This wasn't just Denise's system. It was a system that had already been tested, already used, already proven to work. "Did you know about the house before she told me about the agreement?" I asked, shifting the conversation back where it needed to be. His jaw tightened again. That hesitation, that split second where the truth and the answer he wanted to give collided. That's where everything lives. "Yes," he said. Not loudly, not defensively, just clearly. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It settled. Because now there was nothing left to question. "You knew," I repeated, more to confirm than to accuse. "I knew she was buying it," he said. "I didn't know when she was going to bring you into it." Bring me into it. Not tell you, not include you. Bring me into it. Like I was being added to something that already existed. That's when everything sharpened. Not emotionally, strategically. Because now I wasn't dealing with a hidden system. I was dealing with a system that had already been accepted. By him. That realization didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It didn't feel like betrayal in the dramatic sense. It felt like something quieter, more dangerous. Alignment. He wasn't trying to take from me. He just didn't see anything wrong with the system that would. And that was worse. Because people who don't see the problem don't change it. I leaned back slightly, my posture relaxed, my expression calm. "Do you understand what that means for me?" I asked. He didn't answer. So I did. "If I had signed that agreement," I continued, my voice steady, My assets would have gone into a shared structure. That structure could have been used to support that house, improve it, increase its value. I let that sit for a second before finishing. A house I would live in. A house I would help build. A house I would never own. Silence. Real silence this time. Not avoidance. Recognition. Malik looked down at the table, his hand still resting on the paper, but now it wasn't controlling anything. It was still. I didn't look at it like that, he said quietly. That didn't surprise me, because systems like this don't need you to look at them closely. They rely on you not doing that. That's the problem, I replied. Another pause. Then he looked up again. So what are you saying? There it was, the moment where everything could shift, or stay exactly the same. I didn't raise my voice, didn't lean forward, didn't push, because I didn't need to. I'm saying I'm not stepping into something that was designed without me, I said simply. That landed, not aggressively, but completely. And for the first time since this started, the power in the room felt different. Not because I had taken anything, but because I had refused to give something away. Malik didn't respond immediately. His eyes held mine, searching, calculating, trying to understand where I stood now, not before, not during, but after everything had been seen. And then something shifted in his expression. Not resistance, not agreement, something else, something I hadn't expected. Regret. But not for what had happened, for what was about to happen next. And that's when I realized something I hadn't fully considered before. Denise wasn't the only one who had prepared for this moment. Malik had too. And whatever he was about to say, it wasn't going to be a reaction. It was going to be a move. I didn't fight her. I didn't expose her. I just refused to sign a life I didn't control. And that was enough. Because here's the truth. If you lose control, you've already lost everything. But what I didn't expect was what Malik did next. The silence between us in that restaurant didn't stretch. It shifted. It turned into something heavier, something more deliberate, like we had both crossed an invisible line and there was no way back to where we were before. Malik leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table, his eyes locked on mine with a focus I hadn't seen before. Not calm, not neutral, intentional. I need you to listen to me, he said. That tone was different. Not defensive, prepared. And that's when I realized something that made everything inside me go still. He wasn't reacting. He was executing something he had already decided. I knew about the structure, he continued, his voice steady, controlled. Not everything, but enough to know how it works. I didn't interrupt, because now I needed to hear exactly how far this went. My mom didn't create it from nothing, he said. She refined it, over time, after watching what happened with my dad. There it was again, his father, not as a memory, as a reference point. As long as I've known, Malik continued, everything has been structured to prevent loss, to make sure nothing leaves the family once it enters. Nothing leaves the family. That phrase landed harder than anything else, because suddenly, it wasn't about protection anymore. It was about containment. And I wasn't being brought into a family. I was being absorbed into it. That's why the house is in a trust, he added. That's why the agreement exists. It's not personal. It's how things are done. not personal. That's what people say when something affects you deeply, but they don't feel it themselves. I leaned back slowly, my posture relaxed, my expression calm. That doesn't make it right, I said. He didn't argue. That was the first thing that stood out. Instead, he nodded slightly. I know. That answer caught me off guard, because it wasn't denial. It wasn't justification. It was something else. Acceptance. But not the kind I expected. I know it doesn't work for you, he said. That's when something clicked. Not emotionally, strategically. He wasn't trying to convince me to accept the system. He was trying to decide if I was worth changing it. And that changed everything. So what happens now? I asked. Malik didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder of his own, placing it on the table between us. That's when I felt it. Not fear, recognition. Because now we were no longer reacting to Denise's system. We were creating something else. I had this drafted last night, he said. Last night. That meant one thing. He had already anticipated this conversation. I opened the folder slowly. Inside was a new agreement. Not his mother's version, not mine. Something different. I scanned the first page, my eyes moving quickly but carefully. The language was familiar, but the structure wasn't. Shared ownership, dual consent, independent asset protection. And then I saw it. A clause that stopped me completely. Any property acquired before or during the marriage, if maintained or improved by either party, would require shared ownership restructuring, regardless of initial trust placement. I read that line twice, then a third time, slower, because I understood exactly what it meant. It dismantled the advantage of the trust, not aggressively, not directly, but completely. Because now, if I contributed in any way, financially, structurally, or strategically, the ownership couldn't stay one-sided. I looked up at him. You wrote this? He shook his head slightly. I had help. That's when someone approached the table, a woman I hadn't noticed before. Tall, elegant, early 40s, dark skin with a smooth, even tone. Her hair styled into a sleek, low bun that framed her face cleanly. She wore a fitted navy suit, minimal jewelry, and carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need introduction. But her eyes, sharp, observant, precise, told me exactly what she was. A strategist. I'm Alana Price, she said calmly, corporate attorney. Her voice was steady, confident, and just detached enough to make it clear she wasn't emotionally invested, only strategically aligned. I've worked with Malik before, she added, taking a seat without hesitation. Mostly on restructuring agreements that no longer serve both parties equally. Restructuring. That word sat differently now. Because this wasn't just negotiation anymore. This was a counter-system. Alana opened the document slightly, pointing to specific sections with a pen. What you're looking at isn't a rejection of the existing structure, she said. It's an adjustment that introduces balance. Legal balance. The kind that can't be overridden without consequence. There it was again. Consequences. The one thing Denise's system had never accounted for. I looked at Malik again, and for the first time since this started, I saw him differently. Not as someone trapped inside the system, not as someone blindly following it, but as someone who had learned it well enough to start changing it. You knew this would happen, I said quietly. He didn't deny it. I knew eventually you'd see it, he replied. Eventually. That word mattered, because it meant he had been waiting, not to hide the truth, but to see if I would find it. That realization didn't make things simpler, it made them more complicated. Because now the question wasn't whether I could trust him, it was whether I could trust the version of him that existed inside a system like this. I closed the folder slowly, my mind clearer than it had been in days. Because now, for the first time, this wasn't about what Denise wanted, or what Malik accepted. It was about what I was willing to build, and more importantly, what I was willing to risk to build it. But as I looked back down at the agreement, one line near the end caught my attention. A clause I hadn't fully read before, and the moment I understood what it meant, I realized something neither of them had said out loud. This wasn't just about protecting me. It was about preparing for something else, something bigger, something Denise hadn't seen coming. I thought I understood the system. I was wrong, because the real power in that room wasn't the contract. It wasn't the house. It was the part no one said out loud. The clause at the end of Malik's agreement, the one I almost missed, changed everything. It didn't just protect me. It redefined the entire structure. If any party attempted to override or bypass the new agreement using pre-existing trusts or external control mechanisms, the entire asset structure would trigger a forced legal review and potential dissolution of ownership advantages. In simple terms, if Denise tried to control anything, she could lose everything. That wasn't balance. That was a threat, and she hadn't seen it yet. We didn't wait long. Malik scheduled a meeting at his mother's house the very next evening. No delays, no space for repositioning. And that alone told me something. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a confrontation he had been preparing for longer than I realized. Denise Carter didn't look surprised when we arrived. She stood in her living room, tall and composed as always, her posture perfect, her expression calm in that practiced way that never revealed too much. Her eyes moved from Malik to me, then to the folder in his hand. She already knew something had changed. "You've brought paperwork," she said, her voice smooth, measured. Not a question, a calculation. Malik stepped forward, placing the folder on the glass table between them. "We need to adjust the agreement." We. That word landed differently this time. Denise's gaze sharpened just slightly, the smallest shift in her expression revealing something underneath the control. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. "I assume this is about her concerns," she said, glancing at me briefly before returning her focus to Malik. That was the moment I realized something important. In her mind, I was still the variable, not the threat. Malik didn't respond immediately. Instead, he opened the folder and slid the document toward her. "Read it," he said. No explanation, no negotiation, just instruction. Denise picked up the document with the same calm precision she always carried, her fingers steady, her posture unchanged. She began reading, slowly, carefully, line by line. At first, nothing. Then it happened. Not a dramatic reaction, not a visible shift, just a pause. A fraction of a second longer than before, right at the final clause. That's when everything changed. She read it again, slower. And this time, her eyes didn't move as smoothly across the page. That's when I knew. She understood exactly what it meant. "This is excessive," she said finally, setting the document down with controlled precision. Not emotional, strategic. Malik didn't move. "It's equal." The same word I had used, the same tone. And for the first time, Denise wasn't leading the conversation. She was responding to it. "That clause," she continued, her voice still calm but tighter now, creates unnecessary risk. It destabilizes the entire structure. There it was. Not concern, recognition. Because now, her system had consequences. That's the point, I said quietly. Her eyes moved to me again, this time differently. Not as an outsider, not as a variable, but as someone who had stepped into the system and changed it. You've been advised, she said. Not a question, a statement. Yes, I replied. Another pause, longer this time, because now she wasn't calculating whether the system worked. She was calculating whether she could still control it. And that's when Malik did something I didn't expect. He stepped forward slightly, his voice steady but firmer than I had ever heard it before. If this doesn't get signed, he said, then nothing does. Silence. Not tension, not uncertainty, finality. Because in that moment, something shifted that no contract could fix. Control had changed hands. Not taken, refused. Denise looked at him for a long second, her expression unreadable. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about him, the son who had always operated within the system, now standing outside of it. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. Maybe, but not the kind she meant. Malik didn't respond. He didn't need to, because the decision had already been made. Denise looked back down at the document one last time, and for the first time since I had met her, she hesitated. Not visibly, but enough. Then she signed it. Clean, precise, controlled, just like everything else she did. But this time, it wasn't her system anymore. We left that house without saying much. There was nothing left to say. The conversation had already gone further than words. When we stepped outside, the night air felt different, lighter. Not because the situation was simple now, but because it was clear. I looked at Malik, really looked at him. You knew that clause would corner her, I said. He didn't deny it. I knew it would make her choose, he replied. That was the truth. Not manipulation, not control. Choice. And for the first time, it felt like I had one too. I didn't fight her. I didn't expose her. I didn't destroy anything. I just refused to sign a life I didn't control. And that was enough. Because here's the truth. People don't take your power all at once. They structure it. They position it. They make it feel normal until you forget what it looked like to have it. And if you don't stop it early, you don't just lose control. You lose everything. So tell me, if you were in my position, would you have signed it or walked away? I didn't fight her. I didn't expose her. I just refused to sign a life I didn't control. And that was enough. Because here's the truth. You don't lose everything in one moment. You lose it the moment you stop questioning. So be honest. Would you still marry a man who knew all this and said nothing?